see, there was 117 stars on a wall of Americans who have been killed trying to protect us. And I think all of us need to respect those, whether they're in the CIA or our military, who put their lives on the line. So it's got to be about them, not about us. Yes.
My name is John. Thank you so much for your service, Representative. I originally wrote to you hoping that he wouldn't become our president. It was around the electoral college process versus the popular election process. Where do you stand on the electoral college process, and where do we stand as a nation on that? Can we hopefully prevent something like this happening again by reviewing that? It seems like an archaic loophole that needs to be closed.
So in Philadelphia, there's a hall, and there's a statue of George Washington, and behind the statue is a statement he makes about how the laws of our country are made to be changed. And I don't have the words memorized, but it was a very powerful reference to the fact that, you know, our Constitution, our laws are subject to change. Because what was appropriate in 1776, you know, probably, while much of it has stood the test of time, it has to be subject to change. Now, if we really drill down on the Electoral College, why should votes in Wyoming have 3 times the value as votes in California?
Yes.
And that's what has happened with the Electoral College. So in the last 25 years, the Democrats actually have gotten a plurality of the popular vote, except for one election cycle. That was George Bush and John Kerry. So something is fundamentally wrong if the popular vote does not necessarily reflect who becomes president of the United States. And we've got to make a decision. Now, rural America will want to keep it this way. Small states are going to want to keep it this way because they get more clout.
But why?
Yeah, that's
Why? It's based on slavery.
Because we have been unable so far to deal with. Now, we know how we go about changing the Constitution, right? The amendments to the Constitution take votes of both the House and the Senate, and then ratification by 3/4 of the state legislatures. But there's something else. A number of states have already passed laws, and California is one of them, that basically says that the electors in that state are required to vote for who got the popular vote, who won the popular vote. And when enough states get to that point, you will have, in effect, had the Electoral College removed from being an authority in this regard. So that's one of the ways that you can work at trying to get that to happen.
Thank you.
Yes, in the back?
I have a statement and a question. I guess when they look back on over this period and they decided to write a book about it, which I'm sure they will, it'll start off with this is a perfect storm. And it was, because the GOP controls the House, the Senate, and the White House. We're screwed. There's nothing we can do because we're not in control but to hold on and plan. 8 years ago, when Obama was elected, they were meeting in back rooms trying to figure out how to defeat him and prevent him from doing anything. And that's what we need to be doing now with this gerrymandering. We got to change the House makeup and the Senate makeup because they're in control now. Until the GOP gets tired of Trump, but they are because they can't control him, and impeach him, which probably won't happen. Maybe in 6 months they'll do it. Which still the cancer is just as bad. So at this point now, all we can do is hold on because this is the perfect storm. We're not in control. They steamroll us. So what we need to be planning how this can never happen again.
Lantos for 22 years, and I'm so glad to see you, our heroine, starting from Jonestown, who's faced a whole lot and knows a whole lot about what really counts. Very briefly, I believe that central facts are that we've had an election campaign which was an intentional attack on the software of our representative democracy, which included major components of intimidation of opponents, but also intimidation of the media, which still continues. Paired with that, which still continues, is a technique of lies and confusion, which are pervasive and which are intended to get us to the point where we're so confused that we become apathetic, cynical, drop out of the effort. Congressional staff are very busy and need to focus on what's most important. I am requesting that you do everything you can to put one person in the district, perhaps with volunteers, interns, to the task of, when important lies come out, for instance, the one about how many people were important, not so much because of those particular facts, but because it creates an atmosphere of I can tell a lie and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
When you get lots of calls from constituents or letters or whatever about that you put one of your staff on inquiring fairly urgently of Congressional Research Service, which, if my memory is right, has a separate budget from the executive budget, and therefore is harder to squelch. And although, even if you put it on urgent, sometimes it takes a while to get it back. But when you get back the truth on important things from the Congressional Research Service, which is very balanced and highly reputable, then you can help with the structure of the checks and balances at the place where it is so crucial right now, which is fact-based accountability in government.
So it's very important that all of us heed Marjorie's message. You say something over and over again, even though it's untrue, people begin to believe it. And that is something that we cannot tolerate. What I will do, and I think it's a good suggestion, is that on my website, we'll create a box that will show factually with documentation statements that may be in question. And if you have a question, you should call the office and we'll research it and get the factual. I mean, well, the newest one is this 5 million fraudulent votes, which has been debunked by a number of sources, but nonetheless, as long as someone says it over and over and over again. You know, the irony is, if you remember during the campaign, then candidate Trump said, oh, this campaign's rigged, this election's rigged, this election's rigged. As soon as he got elected, all that stopped, right?
Yeah.
But now it's starting up again with a slightly different. I want to spend a minute on the Russian hack.
Yes, thank you.
So, as you know, I serve on the Intelligence Committee. So there's a lot I can't tell you.
Oh, we're the only intelligence on that committee.
This is the most serious attack on democracy that has ever taken place in the world. And there should be no question that the Russians deliberately hacked both the DNC and the RNC, but then chose to release the information on the DNC.
Right.
And it's quite brilliant because it's very low tech in many respects. and it takes no money. Russian economy now is struggling. You're not going to see Putin putting more money into military, more money into equipment. He is doing what Osama bin Laden did. If you think about it, a $300 printer, and we spent how many hundreds of billions of dollars setting up Homeland Security and making us wait hours to get into an airport and the like. So there's some real serious issues that have to be studied here. And there has to be a bipartisan investigation done. Now, the interest right now is to do it in the House and do it in the Senate. I can guarantee you, we are going to demand that this be comprehensive because, in my view, this is Watergate on steroids. And while we know that, and this is all, there is the unclassified version, I hope you've all read it. The unclassified version of the report makes it clear that they did access a number of state voter files. Now, the expectation is that they did not access the actual voting machines. However, if you don't have a paper trail, there is no way to protect against it. Now, they so easily were able to get to where they got. I think it's incumbent on us and every state in the country to change the way they tabulate votes to make sure they have a paper trail.
Yes.
Because, you know, when China hacked into the Office of Personnel Management, they did so for over a year before we even knew about it. So, in the case of Russia hacking in and the resources to date saying, well, we don't believe they had any effect on the actual vote counting, there's still a question in my mind, how do we know? We don't. So, you can identify states that have more vulnerabilities. It can have a huge effect. So we're going to have to really do a very deep dive on this. Yes.
Hi.
Kate, right?
Yes, good memory. Thank you. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for having this. So I wanted to ask you a question about general strategy. So the Democratic Party is now the party of the opposition. So we're counting on you and your Democratic congressional colleagues to resist the bills that are coming down the pipeline, some of which have already been introduced that threaten the rights of women, immigrants, the LGBT community, and so many more. So can you talk a little bit about what's the general strategy of the Democratic Party to be the party of the resistance?
Okay, now this is kind of a conversation on America. So while you're asking some questions that I can respond to it, in terms of a Democratic conversation would be a different conversation.
Okay.
But I can say this. If you look just recently at SOPA and PIPA, do you remember those two measures? PIPA was the House version, SOPA was the Senate version, and it was all about online private piracy. And overnight, and it was a whole effort to basically hold people accountable for piracy, and it was done in part for Hollywood and others, but hold them accountable online by holding the companies that post responsible and giving them legal authority to go after them. Well, if you remember, overnight, Wikipedia, I think, went dark. Google, got rid of their masthead. There was just a sudden and complete, powerful response by the American people. And the authors of those two bills all of a sudden said, oh, wait a minute. I mean, those bills were going to fly through. But the American people spoke. And that's what has to happen now. For every issue that strikes at our Constitution and the principles we all believe in as Americans, we have to speak up. And the numbers will have an effect. There are a number of websites that you should all go seek out that can provide you good advice about how to communicate with Congress. I think you know how to communicate with me. I'm not necessarily recommending you all do it. But there are ways to have a very powerful impact. Interestingly enough, email is losing power pack. Now the president just shut off the White House phone system, right? And shifted everyone to emails. I object to that because some people don't have access to email. Lots of people don't have access to email, and it takes time to do all that. Whereas you can pick up the phone and you can have an immediate impact. I think I will do everything I can to demand that he reinstate the phone system. But phone calls and letters, physical letters, make a huge impact. Phone calls, letters, and showing up at people's offices. I highly recommend you do it. We have lots of work to do, but if in fact you feel that I've made a mistake and I've gone the wrong way on an issue, phone calls, letters, showing up at the office, right? Okay. Yes.
Hi, my name is Linda. First of all, thanks so much for being here. I was just wondering what you think the best course of action is for people who already agree with you, but are in your district. Should we keep calling you, or should we call?
My staff here will say, call the White House. I really think the president has never been in public office before. He doesn't appreciate yet, hopefully he will, how important it is to listen to all Americans, right? I think conveying your sentiments to the president are key. Contacting family and friends in other districts and encouraging them to contact their local Congress members. They do have an impact. There's a site called Indivisible. You're probably familiar with it. They have recommendations there. There's lots of other sites. I'm not recommending any of them. I'm just telling you that they exist. But these were former staffers on the Hill who gave points and tips on how to communicate with Congress and how to impact them. But numbers do matter. We know that. The president had spent a lot of time talking about, the numbers, right? Having millions of Americans across the country and millions more around the world marching on last Saturday sent a very powerful message. And don't think it wasn't noticed by members of Congress. It was. Now they're hoping that it was a one time, right? And I think, let's face it, the Tea Party was underestimated for a very long time. Smaller groups even. America is not homogeneous. It's really important to appreciate that. America, and there's what's called the big sort. We all kind of move to areas where people all think like we do. Well, there's lots of people around the country that don't think like us. And if you want to try to understand that, I encourage you to read some of the books that have been become great reads recently. Hillbilly Elegy is one, and the other one is Strangers in Their Own Land. Because it's important for us to understand where everyone's coming. And then we've got to try and find a way to work together, but recognizing that the Constitution comes first and foremost. And we're not going back. We're not going back to the dark ages of slavery or the dark ages of identifying people and taking them and placing them in and towards that. We're not going back to what we did to the Japanese Americans. We're not going back to any of those kinds of things. Okay, way in the back. You.
Thank you. My name is Sally McKenzie. Thank you so much for being here. Kind of two-part. The first is contacting you. I understand that faxes are old-fashioned faxes, when they're received by your office, they must be recorded. And so the same would be for like the White House and other members of Congress. The second part is, what is Congress, or can you speak to some of the things that we are doing about the multitude of conflicts of interest that President Trump has in violation of the Emoluments Clause, because he did not go into a blind trust, that he has family, direct family in the White House and in the Oval, and it's really a huge concern, so.
Okay, in terms of faxes, how many faxes do we get on average per week?
About 25 to 30.
Okay, so not very many. We get hundreds and hundreds of emails.
Oh, yeah.
And phone calls. So, interesting point about faxes, because, you know, they've kind of fallen out of, you know, style. But they still exist, we still have them. I mean, it's certainly a way of, I don't know if the White House has one, but that is a tangible way of getting yourself heard. Now, interesting thing about emoluments versus conflict of interest. Separate. The president is presumed that he is not subject to the conflict of interest laws that apply to all of his cabinet that require them to put their things in blind trust or sell them. I think Mr. Cohen just sold hundreds, had to sell his stock in Goldman Sachs, and now is, you know, a couple $100 million richer because of it. So that does apply to officers in the federal government. It doesn't apply to the president, because at the time it was believed that virtually anything the president would do would be a conflict of interest. You could argue as a conflict of interest. So, but no one ever thought, frankly, that we would have a person that had billions of dollars. Maybe. So, I mean, so we really need to think about, what do we do? Do we demand, which is what I think we do, we demand that the president put his holdings in a blind trust? Most presidents have done that. President Trump has chosen not to do it. Now, in terms of the anti-nepotism law, after Robert Kennedy was appointed as the Attorney General, we passed the anti-nepotism law in the federal government. It does not apply to the president's personal staff. It's another example of where we just didn't think it all the way through, right? It should apply to the personal staff as well as any officer in government. But that's why his son-in-law is able to serve in the White House. Now, his son-in-law is subject to the conflict of interest code, I believe, but since he's not getting paid, there's probably a question there as to whether it applies. I don't know the answer to that yet. Yes.
I wanted to talk, I would like you to address something that's going to affect us for more than the next 4 years, and that's the Supreme Court. And is there any way that Democrats can stop one of Trump's appointees from actually being put onto the Supreme Court?
Well, again, I'm going to talk to you in general terms, not in political terms, but one of the things that happened during this last year was that the Republicans in the Senate chose not to even have a hearing and not to vote on it. I don't know that that would be successful in terms of the Democrats doing it as well. I mean, they certainly could filibuster it, and that would be a means by which they could, you know, prevent a particular nominee from moving forward. So it's a fact of life that the Supreme Court could conceivably, you know, be impacted for decades. One of the things the Democrats don't do that the Republicans do is Republicans tend to appoint people to the Supreme Court that are much younger.
Yes.
And the Democrats tend to appoint older people that, I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg is now in her mid-80s and still there. Yes.
Is Dianne Feinstein going to run for re-election? And if she doesn't, will you run for